18 assassination attempts. 18 times the crosshairs fixed on one man, and 18 times he walked away alive. In a world where bullets often silence voices, this survivor has become the loudest echo of defiance in Africa today. Burkina Faso, a land once called Upper Volta, holds beneath its soil veins of gold, rivers of cotton, mountains of uranium. Yet for decades, its people have been chained to hunger, displacement, and despair. The contradiction is cruel. A land rich in treasure, yet branded as one of the poorest nations on earth. From within this paradox rose a 34-year-old captain, Ibrahim Traoré. He refused palaces and presidential salaries, choosing instead the dust of the battlefield and the title Soldier of the People. His defiance did not merely confront his nation's corrupt elite. It struck at the very architecture of Western control. The question is stark. If a small, landlocked nation dares to claim its dignity, can it shift the balance of global power? Do not look away. What comes next may change how we read the map. Subscribe and keep watching. Burkina Faso was not always called by that name. Once, it was Upper Volta, a colony etched into the vast map of French West Africa. In the late 19th century, as Europe carved Africa into pieces of empire, France claimed this patch of land for its gold, its cotton, its minerals, and its people. Colonization was not simply conquest of territory. It was conquest of time, of breath, of futures. Men and women were forced into labor, their sweat harvested not for their families, but for foreign treasuries. When independence arrived in 1960, it came dressed as freedom, but spoke with the accent of Paris. Flags changed, but contracts did not. Before granting formal independence, France secured a chain of agreements. Military bases would remain. French currency would continue to circulate, and rights to gold, oil, and uranium were signed over to French companies. In exchange, the new nation was promised security. In truth, it was bondage by another name, neo-colonialism. The first president, Maurice Yameogo, ruled in step with Paris. When protests erupted, he silenced them with prisons. In 1966, after corruption grew unbearable, Lieutenant Colonel Sangoulé Lamazana led a coup and removed him. For a moment, hope flickered, but Lamazana suspended the constitution and dissolved parliament, tightening his own grip on power. The pattern was set. Coups would become as common as seasons. By 1980, another officer, Saye Zerbo, seized control, only to be ousted in 1982 by Jean-Baptiste Ouédraogo. Each man rose with the promise of renewal. Each fell under the weight of the same old compromises. Paris remained indifferent, so long as contracts for resources flowed uninterrupted. The people of Burkina Faso were left with calloused hands and empty harvests. Schools collapsed. Roads crumbled. The nation's veins of gold enriched vaults in Europe, not kitchens in Ouagadougou. To the world, this was a forgotten backwater. To its people, it was home, aching under layers of betrayal. Then came 1983. A young, fiery captain named Thomas Sankara emerged, declaring that Upper Volta was no more. He renamed the country Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. With him, a seed of defiance was planted. But seeds can be smothered, and as we will see, that fragile sapling faced storms it could not withstand. The soil was poisoned, the road was rough, and yet, could one man's vision truly change the destiny of an entire landlocked nation? 1983 was the year when the soil cracked and a new shoot broke through. Thomas Sankara, soldier, thinker, poet, took power and redefine the destiny of his nation. The name Upper Volta, a colonial scar, was erased. In its place stood Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. Words became a weapon. Names carried meaning. Identity was reclaimed. But Sankara was not content with symbolism. He lived simply, wore the same uniform as his soldiers, cycled instead of riding in convoys. Ministers were forbidden from using luxury cars. They drove modest Renaults. He banned forced marriages and female genital mutilation. He championed women's participation in government, and he launched literacy and vaccination campaigns that touched millions. Within 3 years, cereal production rose by 75%. Burkina Faso could feed its own people, perhaps for the first time in living memory. On podiums, Sankara raised his voice against the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. He called foreign aid a trap, a net designed to hold Africa in dependency. His speeches thundered through conferences. We will not beg. We will stand upright. For the youth of Africa, he was a beacon. For Paris, Washington, and other Western capitals, he was a danger. On the 15th of October, 1987, danger was extinguished. Sankara was assassinated in a coup led by Blaise Compaoré, his former comrade, backed by external powers that found his independence intolerable. The revolution was cut down like a tree in its prime. Compaoré ruled for 27 years. He reversed Sankara's reforms, reopened the nation's veins to IMF loans and French contracts, and cemented himself as a loyal partner to Western interests. For the people of Burkina Faso, the promises of dignity and sovereignty dissolved into decades of repression. But history does not sleep forever. In October 2014, when Compaoré tried to extend his rule by rewriting the constitution, the people erupted. Flames rose from the parliament building. Protesters filled the streets, chanting Sankara's name as if summoning a ghost. Facing the fury of the masses, Compaoré fled into exile in Côte d'Ivoire. The world watched in astonishment. After nearly 3 decades of dictatorship, the people of Burkina Faso had torn down their own tyrant. Yet even in that moment of triumph, the soil was fragile. The seeds of terrorism, drifting from the collapse of Libya, were already sprouting across the Sahel. The story of Sankara had ended in betrayal. The story of Compaoré ended in fire. But the story of Burkina Faso was far from over. If hope could be reborn once, could it rise again from the ashes of dictatorship and despair? After the flames of 2014 faded, many believed Burkina Faso would finally step into the light of stability. But the winds from the north carried something darker. In 2011, the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya unleashed a torrent of armed men across the desert. Fighters, smugglers, and extremists drifted southward, settling in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. They brought with them rifles, explosives, and an ideology of terror. From 2015 onwards, the nation was caught in a storm. Villages in the north and east were attacked without mercy. Schools were burned, markets emptied, and families fled. By 2021, over 10,000 lives had been lost, and nearly 2 million people displaced. Entire regions lived under the shadow of jihadist groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. On paper, foreign troops were present to fight terrorism. French and American forces operated under the banner of counterterrorism. Yet on the ground, the bloodshed only deepened. To many citizens, it seemed that these external powers were more interested in securing influence than in ending the violence. By 2021, more than 40% of the country's territory was effectively beyond state control. The burden fell on young officers at the front lines. They faced heavily armed militants with little more than worn rifles and dwindling supplies. Each day, They risked their lives, while senior leaders in the capital dined with foreign advisors and enjoyed their privileges. Among the ranks, frustration grew into fury. If the nation was to survive, someone had to act. That someone was a 34-year-old captain named Ibrahim Traoré. On the 30th of September 2022, he led a group of soldiers who decided that waiting meant death and action meant survival. Tanks rolled, broadcasts interrupted, and a new face appeared on national television. Calm but resolute, Traoré announced that Burkina Faso's destiny would change. He invoked the unfinished vision of Thomas Sankara, promising to revive sovereignty, dignity, and the fight against corruption. Unlike others before him, he refused to elevate himself. He kept his military rank, declined the presidential salary, and called himself not a ruler, but a soldier of the people. His first steps were bold, launching a massive recruitment of civilian volunteers to defend their own regions, vowing that terrorism would not be negotiated with, but fought until eradicated. He also initiated anti-corruption campaigns, cutting the lavish perks of ministers and bureaucrats. This was the spark of what the world would soon call the Ibrahim Traoré coup. Not just a seizure of power, but a declaration that Burkina Faso would no longer accept the chains of dependency. But the path he chose was not without peril. For every reform, there was resistance. For every act of defiance, whispers of assassination plots grew louder, and the question hovered like a storm cloud. Could one man's courage withstand both the extremists on the battlefield and the pressures of powerful nations beyond its borders? The world could not ignore the shockwaves from Ouagadougou. When Ibrahim Traoré expelled French troops who had been stationed for decades, ordered the ambassador to leave, and shut down French-backed media outlets, it was more than a domestic gesture. It was a rupture in the architecture of Western presence in the Sahel. Neighboring Mali and Niger, long weary of the same burdens, moved quickly. Together with Burkina Faso, they forged the alliance of Sahel states, a pact of mutual defense, sovereignty, and shared control of resources. It was a new block on the African map, small in size yet immense in symbolism. Regional organizations hesitated. ECOWAS, accustomed to disciplining coups, faced a dilemma: condemn Traoré and risk alienating populations who saw him as a hero, or remain cautious and watch the tide of sentiment shift. The African Union spoke of constitutional order, but on the streets across West Africa, murals of Traoré appeared alongside those of Sankara. Far beyond the Sahel, the tremors reached global powers. Russia stepped forward, supplying weapons and reopening its embassy in Ouagadougou after more than 3 decades. Moscow's message was clear. It would support any nation resisting Western interference. China, too, entered the frame, negotiating infrastructure and mining projects with promises of partnership rather than conditional aid. The United States and European Union responded with unease. Official statements emphasized democracy and stability, but beneath the rhetoric was fear. If one small state could reorient its alliances so dramatically, what might happen if others followed? The phrase Burkina Faso Revolution began to circulate not only in African capitals, but also in foreign think tanks and policy circles. Commentators asked whether this was the dawn of a broader movement, an African assertion that trade, not aid, would shape its future. Yet revolutions attract adversaries as well as admirers. For every handshake in Moscow or Beijing, there were quiet conversations in Western embassies about strategy, influence, and how to contain the defiance. Burkina Faso, once dismissed as a forgotten corner of the Sahel, now stood at the crossroads of geopolitics. The question lingered. Could a young captain's defiance inspire a continent, or would the combined weight of international pressure crush this fragile experiment? The road ahead for Burkina Faso is neither smooth nor certain. It stretches like a dusty track across the Sahel, lined with both thorns and seeds, danger and promise. On one side lies opportunity. For the first time in its history, the nation has authorized a state-run gold refinery. No longer will raw gold leave its soil unprocessed, enriching others while its people starve. Permits for export have been suspended, forcing a new model where value is added at home. If sustained, this could transform gold from a symbol of plunder into a foundation for sovereignty. The alliance with Mali and Niger also carries potential. Together, these landlocked states form a shield, not merely against terrorism, but against economic dependence. If they stand united, they can negotiate with larger powers from a position of strength rather than weakness. The dream is clear: dignity through partnership, not pity. But the other side of the road is shadowed. Terrorist groups have not vanished. They retreat, regroup, and strike again. Sanctions or diplomatic isolation from Western institutions could squeeze an already fragile economy. And above all, the specter of assassination still hangs over Ibrahim Traoré. 18 attempts have already failed, yet each failure only hardens the resolve of those who wish to see him gone. The nation's youth look to him as a symbol, but symbols must be guarded carefully. A single bullet could fracture hope, yet a single reform could nourish it. The balance is as delicate as a seedling in the dry season. Still, history whispers that no empire lasts forever. If Burkina Faso can nurture its soil, if its people can walk the road together, then perhaps this small landlocked nation may prove that sovereignty is not a privilege granted, but a right reclaimed. The journey is not over. It has only just begun. And so we are left with a cliffhanger that hangs not just over one man, but over a continent. Will this fragile path lead to harvest or to ruin? The story of Burkina Faso is not only the story of a nation, it is the echo of a continent long reduced to silence, now daring to speak again. From colonial conquest to neo-colonial chains, from coups to dictatorships, from terror to defiance, the journey has been written in sweat, in betrayal, in courage. Ibrahim Traoré stands in this continuum, not as a savior, but as a signal. By keeping the rank of captain, by refusing the trappings of power, by calling himself a soldier of the people, he has reminded the world that leadership can spring from humility. The Ibrahim Traoré coup was more than a change of government. It was a demand that Africa's resources nourish Africans first. And yet, the soil is fragile. Assassination attempts number in the dozens. Jihadist threats remain, and the shadow of powerful nations hovers still. But amidst the uncertainty, there is a harvest of hope. The refinery approved in 2023, the suspension of gold export permits in 2024, the alliance of Sahel states. These are not just policies. They are markers of a Burkina Faso revolution that dares to imagine independence in practice, not just in name. The question stretches beyond Ouagadougou. If one small landlocked country can reclaim its dignity, what stops the rest of Africa? Will Traoré's experiment survive long enough to inspire a generation? Or will it be crushed by the weight of global interests? For now, the world watches, some with admiration, others with unease. But one truth is undeniable. The Ibrahim Traoré coup has forced the world to look at Burkina Faso not as a victim, but as a protagonist in its own destiny. If you believe sovereignty matters more than aid, if you believe Africa's story deserves to be told by Africans, then do not turn away. Subscribe, share, and walk with us into the chapters yet to be written.